Hello, I'm Dr. Marty Markman from City of Hope. In our last segment of Minutes with Markman, we discussed the nature of interpretation of older clinical trials and how that should impact what we think about as we move forward, both in our additional clinical trials we're developing, but also in our standard of care options for patients with cancer that are under our care. I emphasized the fact that I was going to be focusing on gynecologic cancer because that was my own area of clinical and research expertise. And I will continue that focus on ovarian cancer studies in this particular segment. What I want to talk about here is some really older studies actually conducted more than 20 years ago. Landmark studies that were conducted in the area of advanced ovarian cancer, really the introduction of paclitaxel into the armamentarium of oncologists in general, and very specifically in ovarian cancer. So the trial I want to start with was a phase 3 randomized trial that looked at the combination of cisplatin plus that new drug, paclitaxel, Taxol, versus cisplatin and cyclophosphamide, which at that point would have been the standard of care. This study was conducted across the country. It was probably the most rapidly accruing study, certainly in ovarian cancer, might have been in any other phase 3 study, because at that point, many of you remember, paclitaxel was considered a wonder drug, and obviously a spectacularly good drug, but truly a wonder drug in limited supply. And to be able to get this drug, paclitaxel, getting on this trial was very important. So this particular study demonstrated superior survival in favor of the cisplatin and paclitaxel. As reported in the New England Journal of Medicine, the median overall survival for the cisplatin paclitaxel regimen was 38 months. Median overall survival, 38 months. Remember that number because I'm going to come back to it in a moment. So what I'd like to do now is compare the survival results of this trial to the next trial conducted by the Gynecologic Oncology Group in this essentially identical group of patients. Now, I want to emphasize, again, cross-trial comparisons are fraught with great hazard. You're concerned about the patient populations. Are they the same? That, in fact, is one of the reasons why we do randomized controlled trials. So we can really go back and forth, not make these decisions. Contemporaneous patients randomized to one arm or the other. And therefore, if you're going to do cross-trial comparisons, it's very important, in fact, critical that you justify this. What makes these patients potentially more similar than not in terms of the discussion that you're having? In this case, I will provide that data. The trial that I highlighted right now, the cisplatin paclitaxel study, was conducted in a very short period of time. The study was over, accrual was finished. Of course, there were no results yet. The Gynecologic Oncology Group made a decision at that point, along with the NCI, to conduct another trial, which wasn't identical, but very similar. In fact, it was a single agent cisplatin versus single agent Taxol versus the combination of cisplatin and paclitaxel, the identical combination that had, in the previous study that I just noted, that we learned had a median overall survival of 38 months. This trial was conducted, same group of doctors, same eligibility criteria, same dose and schedule of the cisplatin and paclitaxel. What were the results of this trial for the regimen of cisplatin paclitaxel? The answer is the median overall survival was 26.3 months, almost a year shorter median survival. Same group of doctors, same eligibility criteria, literally started months after the previous study was started and finished. And yet the median survival in this population was a year shorter. Why? Well, of course, we can't know for sure, but one very obvious explanation is as follows. When that initial randomized phase 3 trial that I referred to was started, even though there was great hope for paclitaxel, there was also tremendous concern about the potential for severe cardiac toxicity resulting in sudden death. In fact, patients randomized to the cisplatin and paclitaxel arm in that study, when the study started, in fact, got their first dose in the coronary care unit of a hospital. I remember doing this when I was at the Cleveland Clinic. We take patients, we put them in the coronary care unit, monitored as we gave them paclitaxel. Think about that today. Of course, we learned relatively quickly that paclitaxel surely has some cardiac effects, but not the sudden effects we were concerned about. That was clearly due, as we learned and have learned, was due to hypersensitivity reactions, which we learned how to care for. However, as a result, the patients who were entered into that initial study were more likely than not, if they had cardiac comorbidities, the doctor was concerned about the cardiac comorbidities, the patient and their family were concerned about the risk of sudden death, that patient population with these relevant comorbidities did not enter that initial trial, or less patients did. However, when that second study was initiated, and certainly by the time it was finished, the concerns about cardiac toxicity had very much diminished. And therefore, patients with more serious, but yet still eligible comorbidities were entered in the trial. See where I'm going with this? Regimen against the cancer was the same. The impact on the cancer had every reason to be the same. But the comorbidities, whether they were cardiac or renal, pulmonary, diabetic complications, etc., had their impact. Could have been related to the cancer, could be related to therapy, but at the end of the day, the median survival was reduced by almost a year. No reason to say it had anything directly to do with the drugs or the cancer, but it was the patient population entered in those studies, separated only by months. But a world of difference in terms of the concerns about the risk of the drugs, which dissipated. These results, these trial 1 and trial 2, really emphasize the critical importance of the patient populations, the need for randomized trials when they can be done and are appropriate, and the potential impact of comorbidities on survival outcomes in this setting of complex diseases, complex therapies, and in particular, in older patient population. And I thank you for your attention.